UDL in Action podcast wishes to acknowledge First Nations peoples in Australia and across the world whose songlines traverse the globe. We pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging whose cultural traditions inspire and continue to educate.
As an early career teacher, how can I design learning experiences that build students' strategy development and executive function while also fostering inclusive practices and gradually increasing their independence?
Welcome to our final episode in this series of the UDL in Action podcast, focused on designing learning experiences that foster students' strategy development and executive function, while also implementing inclusive practices and gradually increasing their independence. I'm your host, Rebecca Rosenberg, and joining me is my brilliant co-host, Rhonda Laswell from Indiana. Rhonda is a retired educator and Universal Design for Learning coordinator. She spent nearly 2 decades immersed in UDL as both a teacher and a professional development coach for educators. Well, Rhonda, we are in our final episode for this series. Thank you for sharing your enthusiasm and expertise on all things UDL.
My pleasure, always, of course.
In this episode, we will explore the considerations for implementing strategy development as part of our teaching practice. Essentially, it's about cultivating our students' executive functions. To lead our discussion today, let's have another listen to the question posed by Zach, an early career high school teacher based in regional Queensland.
As an early career teacher, how can I design learning experiences that build students' strategy development and executive function while also fostering inclusive practices and gradually increasing their independence?
Rhonda, I know you have given us multiple examples in past episodes of scaffolding lower level skills that require less executive processing. I'm interested to know, as alluded to in Zach's question, how teachers can scaffold higher level skills and such as self-assessment strategies and formative assessment, and your examples that lead to success in developing students' strategic thinking. What are your thoughts in this regard?
So it's interesting because executive functioning is something that has to be taught. It's a skill. And we often say, well, when you're in 6th grade, you should already know how to, or when you're in 9th grade, you should already know how to. But that isn't even really the issue. The issue is the brain develops from the back to the front and from the inside out. And it's that portion of the brain, the strategic network isn't even fully developed till our mid-20s. So in order to support students, we really have to have frameworks in place that will allow them to learn the skills they need in order to be able to set goals, in order to monitor their progress. And so inside the classroom, those things can be done well ahead of time, but right alongside and built into the lesson. And I think that's the key. One example of something I did with my students is every time we had an assessment, we would then take some time to reflect on what we had done the last 2 weeks and have a conversation about that, but they would also do their own personal reflection. So here's an example. I would give them a little half sheet of paper and it would say something like, how much time did you study for this assessment? Did you have any missing assignments? Were you absent? What grade do you think you got? And then below that, what grade did you get? Are you happy or dissatisfied? And what can you do differently next time to improve?
Right.
And I would give them a grade report at the same time I gave them the assessment back. And I would let them really look over that and determine for their own selves how they could do better. Because if we don't stop and pause and really allow our students to dig into that process, they just go through life throwing that paper in the trash or in the bottom of the locker and they never really see the impact it has on the overall process, right? So another example I would do at the beginning of the school year, because for us as teachers and educators, challenging students to do better doesn't always come in the way that it needs to with executive function. It's often more about content, right? But for
So it's
students
not
to
so
do,
instinctive.
yes. And
Mm.
so you have to build that in, giving them progress reports every Friday where they can see grades and missing assignments is really, really important. But at the beginning of the school year, I would say, okay, let's just talk a little bit about grades. Let's say you have 100 and you have a 50 on your next assignment. What's the average of those two? Well, the average of those two is 75. You've got to see. But what if you have 100 and then you decide you don't want to do your homework and you have a missing assignment? What's your grade now? It's 50%. Even though you knew what you were doing, you're digging a hole that's very hard to get out of. So I would teach my students that at the very beginning of the school year. So I think that's a great place to start. But when we're talking about executive function, we can't do that without talking about inhibitory control, working memory, because those are also part of executive function, even though it technically on the guidelines lies under action and expression, right? So when we think about goals, we'll just start there, setting meaningful goals. The goal that I would have for my students, that may not necessarily be the goal they have for that day, right? Or that lesson. So making sure we've talked about this, the goal is posted, but it also needs to be accessible and understandable. Is there anything about it you don't understand, right? And I always recommend that you give students the opportunity to put the goal in their own words, right? And they can have sub goals too. So the goal might be this content or this strategy, or skill, but I might also have some personal goals, right? I might need to be thinking, well, I need to make better choices, or I need to take notes, or I need to use maybe AI to take notes. Like giving them options for how to be organized and to collect information is really, really important, because once you make it sound accessible to them, they're more likely to latch onto those things and use them. So, and a lot of this works front loading, especially at the beginning of the school year. The more you do in those first 4 to 6 weeks, the smoother that train ride will be down the road, right? And then that class just starts to hum, and they have all of that in place, and it makes it much easier for them. And the other thing too with executive function that I think is really important to think about is that if the brain's hijacked, it's not going to be able to be what I would call open for business. I've talked about Dr. Bruce Perry and the neurosequential model. That brain has to be in a place where it feels safe and it believes that it can be successful and it
Yeah.
believes it can take risks so that it can open up and let that frontal lobe begin to be part of the process. So I think
What?
that is probably the utmost key,
Yeah.
right, to getting
What
students
I
on board.
And what I'm hearing as you're providing these wonderful examples is the importance of giving students time to reflect on what they're currently doing, as well as what the outcome of their assessment tasks are, and all that sort of thing. But just having that time to stop and look back not only on what they have been doing, but also incorporating that into your weekly routine is a really just a proactive approach in supporting our students and their executive function. That's great. So regarding consideration 6.1, why is it so important the learning goals are meaningful and purposeful for all learners then?
Well, we got to have everybody on the same page going forward, right? And we don't want to, when we are providing accessibility, we're not watering anything down. We are still utilizing the same goal. Now, I might have some sub goals that I need to attend to going towards that. Now, and certainly if I have a student with a cognitive disability who may never reach the goal that we have, the overarching goal, that is okay, right? But it's still the goal. And we have to have sub goals to help the student move towards that because we never know. We can never know the potential someone will get to if we don't give them the opportunity to try.
So
And
it's really
so,
strategic and purposeful. It gives
yes,
clear direction. Yep, that's
yeah,
great. That's great. And I like the way you consistently say how important it is to ask students to think about their own personal goals. So it's again, you'll have a generalized goal as a class, but then asking students to reword it for so that it's personalized is really intentional too, which is great. And the more something is personalized, the more we have agency behind what we're doing as well. So
yeah.
when it comes, sorry, continue.
No, I was just going to say that the learning goal is posted right for the content of the skill, but I may have a student who's working towards that goal, but they also may need to be working on their note-taking skills, right? Or they may need to be working on using the right resources. And so talking to them and having conversations about those things gets them thinking about learning how to learn. And that is really important because then context really doesn't matter and content doesn't matter because they're learning how to be successful in an academic manner that will also make them successful in life. Because if you want
So
to go home and build a deck, you've got to have a plan, right? You've
you
got to
do.
follow, you have to have a goal and those things have to be in place for you to be able to be successful. And using those kind of examples with students too is also very beneficial as well.
That's great. And it actually reinforces consideration 6.2, anticipating and planning for challenges, and reinforces why it's so important to identify potential barriers and consider strategies so that so you can identify uh, those barriers that potentially will hinder students. And students can also consider, well, what can I put in place to help me to be successful, to build that deck or whatever that might be?
Yes.
And brainstorming strategies for overcoming barriers together is also a really effective approach, would you say?
Yes, because you can have something as simple as, okay, I'm stuck. What do I do? Well, you have a strategy for that. Ask a
Mm,
shoulder partner, ask another classmate, use a resource, then come see the teacher. Now,
mhm.
different ages, you can have different layers and levels of that, but just something as simple as I've hit a wall or I'm stuck and I need help. Just being able to learn the skill, right? I mean, how many people go over and ask a coworker a question? So why are we saying there's no talking in this room? If you're not talking, something's wrong, right? Because learning isn't silent. It makes noise. And so giving them permission to use those resources and but to also be part of a learning community is really, really important because we're not looking to conform anybody and we're not looking for people to be compliant. We're looking for them to be individuals who are creative and we want them to be engaged. And so an engaging environment is not stifling and it's not silent.
And that reinforces consideration 6.3 too, organising information and resources by connecting and collaborating with peers and for us as teachers, as colleagues, it enables us to consider uh, uh, it equips us and enables us to consider flexible tools and processes that are going to set us up for success. So, and which also in turn supports our memory and ability to apply what we're learning in the classroom to like a specific task that we're wanting to complete successfully. Would you say?
Well, yes, and organizing, information and resources is probably something that even many adults can struggle with from time to time. And so giving them a way to do that and not just saying, if I say you need to be more organized, I've done nothing to help you be more organized. But how often is that said? You need to, if you were more organized, you wouldn't have so much trouble in this class. Well, then what am I doing to help support that? And so, for example, giving them a system and a way to do that, right? And we know teachers who do binders and different things. I found it very successful to have a crate for each class period and then a hanging folder for each kiddo. And that was great because if I had a kiddo who I knew, struggled with being organized, I would just say to everybody, hey, if you need to use the crate instead of your locker, remember it's over here, right? And I'd have kids put their notebooks in there for science. I'd have kids put a paper in there. If they had gotten something done and it was due the next day, they would just go ahead and put it in there. And what was great about that was if they had a resource period later in the day, I would always tell the other teachers, let them come to my room. If they have anything they need to work on, they can just come grab it. And so they knew right where it was. Very simple strategy, but very beneficial because it gives them a way to be organized. Now, what's the goal? The goal is for the student to eventually have a system that they can utilize out of their locker or their backpack so that someday in life, when they're in their home, they can be organized with their bills. So again, you have to provide the opportunity and you have to give them examples and you have to allow them to use it in what I would call a real world way. And a real world way is I'm using it in my educational learning process. It's built into content and skill development.
I also love that it provides steps or phases, should I say, rather than steps. Steps can be difficult and they tend to imply that it's one step after the other, whereas phases we go back and forth. But by bringing in that crate where students can just readily put their resources or come back to the crate where they know their task is going to be and they don't have to go looking is just helping them be more organized, which then again builds confidence to become more and more an independent learner right now as well as in the future. And it's so well and good to say, oh, you need to be organized, but that can be such a big concept to get your head around. But what you've provided is just such a simple strategy for students to consider when they're to just start to implement in their daily lives, so that they can be more organized, let alone just using a diary or using a notebook that they can easily take around and refer to. Now they can do that digitally or just via just a hard copy. Are there digital tools that you found were especially useful in your teaching?
I think that any kind of learning management system is always helpful because it doesn't matter where the kiddo is, they can access the information. So I made sure everything was uploaded and available to them, whether they were in my classroom, whether they were in a resource room, or whether they were home or absent. So I think anything like that is always great. Of course, today in this day and age, now that AI is really on the scene, there are so many ways that can even be utilized. That can be your note taker. We were at our financial advisors yesterday for a meeting, and he said, "Do you mind if I use the AI note taking?" We're like, "No, not at all." He goes, "Honestly, it's better than a human." He goes, "I can't do it that good of a job." It even categorizes things. So I just say you need to stay up on, what's on the edge and what's trending, mostly because your students will already
Yeah,
know, most likely. And the best way to handle that a lot of times is ask them, what are you using right now? Like,
yeah.
what helps you? What are you playing around with? Because, I mean, that's what they're going to want to use. And
Yeah.
that's what's in their vernacular at the time. So, I
And it
mean, it's
provides
always
choice
changing.
again. Yes,
Yes,
and it
choice.
provides choice. So, if we're turning now to consideration 6.4 and thinking about what you were talking about before in regards to the importance of reflection, by implementing these strategies, it also enhances a student's capacity for monitoring their own progress too. So, do you think it's important to explicitly teach metacognition and support students to track and reflect on their growth over time?
Oh, absolutely. I think they're always astonished. At least I got that impression with my students. And one of the things I would do again at the beginning of the year, or the beginning of a quarter, or the beginning of a unit, is I would say, these are all the different things you're going to learn. And I would put the standards up for those things. And I'd say, how do you feel about that? And they'd be like, that seems so complicated. I don't know how I can ever understand that. I said, well, you're going to, right? Because I'm here to help you. And I'm providing you with the opportunity to learn skills that will help you be successful in here. As of right now, today, first day of school, everybody's an A student to me. I don't know what you've done in the past, and I don't care, right? I'm here to take you from where you are forward and go on that journey with you. And as we would look back and we would monitor our progress and we would see what we've learned, they then became like, wow, this is possible. Wow, with these strategies, I can do this. When you help me be organized, when you support the fact that even though we're in science, there's some math and I struggle a little bit with that. And so you've allowed me to use a calculator or, whatever tool I need. They then begin to actually build in moments where their success pushes them a little farther the next time, right? And so then they're more willing to take risks. And I think progress monitoring is super important because if you think about being a teenager, a middle schooler, or even an elementary kiddo, grades are like in this abyss. And a lot of times they say, well, that's the grade you gave me. No, that's the grade you earned. And so they need to get in the habit of thinking this is a result of my actions, not the teachers, but my actions. And so placing that burden on them is not a bad thing, but they need to understand that it's not just in the abyss and it doesn't just go in a computer and spit out some random, right? Some random score. Because if they're monitoring along the way, they know right where they are. But then they
And it
also
also,
feel locus of control because they can see it and it's visual.
additionally, they're also seeing what's worked for them and what may potentially there isn't such a great approach to take for them personally. But when they reflect and see that they've taken those risks to try different strategies and it's been successful, then it's moving them out of their comfort zone, which is why it's so important for us as teachers to continue to expand what students might be inclined towards. So they might consistently choose to. I just want to use PowerPoint. I don't want to try anything else like Canva. That's just too full on. But by providing these opportunities to experiment and then also providing opportunities to reflect, they can see how moving out of that their comfort zone and experimenting has been is it's worthwhile. And that's, like you say, that's proactive and positive for our students now as well as in the future.
And it's okay to pause and do a check-in and say, hey, anybody that's using this particular strategy, like if you're using like an AI note taker, how's that working for you? Is that really good? Or would you rather do a recording where you can replay it and listen to it? Does anybody know a good one right now? Just taking a moment to check in on what you're using to see if it's working for you, and then just share, how's this been useful for you? What do you dislike about it? Because somebody might hear something and go, oh, I want to try that, right? So Fridays for me were always a good day to do a check-in, but it was also every Friday they knew they were getting a report of their grades listed with all the assignments, what their current scores were, and if anything was missing. And I would give them like 7 minutes to look over it. They had permission to go to their locker. So they look at it and went, I did that. I said, but you didn't turn it in. It's in my locker. Well, yeah, you can go get it. And then they all had highlighters. I said, all you got to do is highlight what you're turning in, because I'm not going to go through and try to find out of 25 things what you turned in. So highlight it and staple it to your progress report. Your grade will be changed later today. It'll go in. And that
Great.
simple success for them was huge, because it wasn't, well, you should have turned it in. Well, can't do anything about it now. It's in the bottom of your locker. It should have been turned in. You're not getting credit for it. They did the work, right? But their executive functioning skills didn't allow them to get it from point A to point B. I'm not going to punish you for that. That's a skill.
And this really is just such a perfect segue to our final consideration, which is 6.5, is because as teachers, in that example that you have just provided, is challenges exclusionary practices that we can sometimes do without thinking about the bigger picture. So, how we rethink what success really looks like and design more inclusive systems recognizes all students' strengths and needs and doesn't hone in on those areas that do, like if we set students up for success by supporting them like you have just talked about, how beneficial and inclusive that is for all students and not excluding students because they left their paper in the bottom of their locker. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts?
Well, I think it's easy to, just kind of quip out platitudes, and that doesn't help anybody, and it's hard to change that mindset, even sometimes for adults, to begin to challenge their own. And that starts with being self-reflective yourself. And you can't teach students to be self-reflective if you're not. So sometimes that's the challenge of an administrator with some professional development, you know, and doing some of those things in a staff meeting sometimes that make them go, just to cause a little bit of that disequilibrium. And that's just the coach coming out of me there. But anytime that you are making a judgment, you probably need to back up. And we can discriminate, and it's not an overt discrimination, right? But I'm discriminating against you because your executive functioning skills are not at the level I expect them to be. And it's my job to teach you, right? Not to criticize you or discriminate against you. And so that's an opportunity for learning, right? That's an opportunity to teach them to be more independent. And the more independent they are, the more engaged they are. The more engaged they are, the less behavior issues you have. I kind of like my classroom that way. I mean, it was nice, right? I enjoyed it. They enjoyed it.
I
So,
bet.
do you want to be miserable, or do you want to feel like you're being right all day? Because, it's not your room, it's their room, right?
And
And
Rhonda,
they
do you
should,
feel like what you're expressing is, again, reflecting on what success really does look like?
yeah. Success is students being happy. If they're happy to be in your room, if they want to be there, if they're happy to be learning, that means they have been empowered with the tools, the strategies, and the resources to be actively engaged in the process. And it doesn't matter where they are on the line, right? Everybody's at a different spot. That's always the case. If I take a group of teachers in a room and we talk about different skills, we're going to have people all over a continuum. We're also going to have people all over a continuum just on interest, right? So, and be honest, I would say this is a standard. This is dictated by the state. We have to learn this. You have to learn this. I have to teach this. And we're going to have as much fun doing it as possible. I mean, be real, be authentic, um, sit down at their level. Don't always have to be standing at the front of the class, right? You can be sitting in the middle and just rotating around. Get on their level, be shoulder to shoulder. Um, you know, Standing over a kid can cause exclusionary feelings, right? Because now there's a power differential. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be respected, but that door swings both ways. And so if you really want to bring a student's brain down to calm, you get shoulder to shoulder and on their level. You don't lean over them, right? And so just your body language alone can cause exclusionary emotions to occur for a student.
A differentiated approach really ensures students' diverse needs and strengths are considered. So, as we wrap up this episode, Rhonda, and wrap up this series, remember that promoting strategy development and executive function in your students is not just about teaching them how to learn more effectively. It's about empowering them to take control of their own learning journey too. Rhonda, what is your takeaway message for listeners today?
Ooh, we've covered a lot in this one, kind of, and it's deep, right? Because there's a lot to it. I would say that it is being respectful and honoring where each student's at. It's that
That's
simple.
perfect. It is. And allowing them to reflect in the process.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening. By setting meaningful goals and anticipating challenges, organizing resources, encouraging reflection and monitoring, you're not just equipping your students with the skills they need to thrive in school, but also in life, as we've reinforced time and time again today. If today's episode sparked ideas or reflections, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at udl.in.action.podcast@gmail.com. And if you'd like the show notes or resources mentioned, just click on the link at the end of each episode description in our G Drive folder for listeners. And please share our podcast with your colleagues through YouTube or Spotify. Until next time, keep designing for possibility, not predictability. We'll see you in series 3.
Toodaloo.